Welcome to the Early AI podcast. I'm Seth Earley.
And I'm Chris Featherstone.
And we're really excited to introduce our guests for today to discuss AI technologies and aligning them with business value before you look to do implementation. We're going to explore the potential of AI really to think about what does consciousness mean in terms of AI. There's a lot of emulation of that. We kind of talked about in one of our prep calls. And what are the philosophical implications of that? We'll talk about the strategic approach to AI development and emphasize the understanding of data in the context of business goals and business value, and look at the current limitations of AI technologies and how quantum computing can actually offer additional solutions. Our guest today is a well-known figure, distinguished figure in the realm of information intelligence, artificial intelligence. He is a multi-talented professional. He's from Ukraine. He holds 3 master's degrees and 2 PhDs in fields ranging from biotech to artificial intelligence. He has a very rich history in software engineering and healthcare and R&D. Today's episode, we're going to go into the complexities and future of AI, discuss some of the current limitations and the potential of quantum computing in these areas. So really excited to have Alex Gurbych. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for the introduction, Seth. My pleasure being here, and let's talk about it.
So, a lot of times when we start encountering myths surrounding AI, and do you want to highlight some of the things that you see around Gen AI and AI in general, and what people get wrong about the capabilities, especially in life sciences and healthcare?
So first, I think that we are on the verge of a second, I apologize, it's a third time where people is overestimating AI because of the hype, because of the ChatGPT and stuff. But if you look into the past, every wave ended with a winter. Probably this one will end with a winter, but every wave was higher and higher. If the top of the first wave was barely perceptron, barely doing very simple actions, and the second wave ended with the expert system, something that wasn't AI by fact, but it was of little help. I think ChatGPT and other Gen AI technologies, they already revolutionized the world, how we work, how we talk, what we do. So I think a lot of impact here.
Where do you think, Alex, that this third wave is going to die or lose steam?
It will not die. It will lose steam a little bit because now people think that they are overestimating it a little bit. They think it can do anything, right? Oh, it can help, write me email. Oh, then it can generate molecules, right? It should, right? But then they start applying it. Oh, okay. Sometimes works, sometimes not. Now I understand. This is just another tool. And you have to know how to use it. You have to know how to train it. You have to know limitations. And only after that, you can master it. And it is it flourishes with its benefits, right? Mm-hmm. So I think we're coming to that, to understanding that it is not almighty Gen AI or AI, right? But it has use, it has drawbacks, it has strong sides, but it's just a tool. It's yeah.
So when you start looking at practical integration of AI, can you talk a little bit about some of the challenges that you face when you're integrating AI into legacy systems in organizations? What ends up happening?
With pleasure. This story repeats every time. Literally every project, we have to split into AI development. And this joke, it's 80% of the project development, and AI application and integration with business. Yeah, and that's another 80%. Right? If you sum up, it will be not 100. If you sum up, it will be 160, right? And the joke is that people oftentimes they underestimate the effort and time which is required for the AI to be integrated actually in business and people start using it.
What's interesting is I was watching a program the other day. It was an executive leadership podcast or recording on AI. And they talked about how use cases are not the way to look at this, but behavioral change is the way to look at this. And I kind of disagree with that. I feel like use cases are paramount. You have to really talk about use cases and start defining what people will do exactly with it. But there is behavioral change as well. Do you want to talk about what you've experienced there, or what you've seen, use case versus behavioral change? I think we have to define a use case that's really important to the business, and then it will entail behavioral change. People will have to do their jobs differently. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Oh, I have practical examples, and I will give you several now. First of all, I agree that it has to start with the use case. Because if there is no use case, there is no value for business, or people cannot articulate it with very simple words, there is no reason to start. Then this is some research that will end up, somewhere, but it's good for academia, but not for business. Use case. And I see behavioral change is a result of is a consequence of a use case. This is more like how people adopt it. And the example could be, recently we worked with a network of clinics, one of the largest in Canada. And they wanted to develop AI for doctors, like a radiologist looking at imaging, and they wanted to increase their accuracy with the help of AI. So we developed the technology, but then we got nearly 100% refusal from doctors to use it. I talked to probably 20 doctors. All of them told me, oh, this is a mistake here. Oh, this is wrong, blah, blah, blah. So they all refused to use it. Why? Later, I understood that they are just afraid of being replaced with it. So this is a use case and how it ended. But then it found its application because the imaging, when doctors get it, it goes already with some pre-findings from technicians. And technicians appear to be more open-minded, younger, less experienced, willing to become rats at some point. So where they happily adopted it, and at the very end, it worked, but even not in the way that we intended. We wanted doctors to use AI to be better doctors. Yeah, go to any doctor and say, hey, I will give you a tool that will make you a better doctor. What will they will tell you? I'm already a better doctor, go away. Who are you to tell me that, right? So the situation ended that technicians using AI described findings for every imaging, and then this image with AI help and generated findings, it came to doctors. So at the very end, doctors were using AI, but not in the way they expected.
Don't you think
it helped?
Oh, keep going. Sorry, keep going.
So the use case was to increase accuracy of doctors and reduce this return rate when patients have to go back and do some additional imaging, some wrong diagnoses, or they're worried and they're whatever. And it happened, but not in the way that we expected. So there was behavioral change that was a result and driven by a use case with AI.
Yep, no, that makes a lot of sense.
So don't you feel like, because what I see generally, and this is maybe for both Alex, you and Seth, is that a lot of organizations missed out on kind of two core concepts, right? The first of those is that they don't really understand how to do a true business value assessment on what the use case might be, right? That's one. And then two, I feel like we're getting into this notion because the investment into a quote unquote data scientist is one that is, I think, so critical, centered around always looking for setting those hypotheses, looking for the answers, looking for key information in there. However, now instead of everybody focusing on data, almost everybody has to be in this notion of their own kind of data scientist type of thinking, right? Because that's exactly what your doctors are doing in these aspects, is asking questions, because you can't give infinite investment to somebody just to do science, right? So what's the outcome of that? And I feel like we missed those two huge things. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, both of you.
I completely agree. Business wants ROI. If business spends money, that's investment for business. Yeah. Otherwise, why?
Exactly.
What's the reason, right? And business wants what? To be more efficient. like to scale, get better reputation, or decrease its own operational costs.
Sure.
There's nothing behind. And before we started this development, for example, we did a proper assessment and we interviewed more than 10 doctors and we collected the range of issues. Then we started. Then we got this drawback, like, my God. When they saw it in reality, they're like, oh no, take it away, take it, no, it's wrong. It's bad. No, never.
You know, I mean, it's just that notion too, where, you know, I heard somebody smarter than me say, you know, like this, listen, AI is not going to take over jobs, but people who know how to use AI will take over those jobs, which I agree with. And part of that is, you know, like you said, like, hey, understanding how to utilize this is, you know, most important. It's not going to build molecules. However, it can be, you know, more productive. You know, I don't use, you know, my vehicle, you know, to drive it into the ocean, right? That's what a boat's for. So, you know, it's practical usage of whatever those tools are, right, for these kind of scenarios. However, I do feel like there's still this notion of, you know, the blurring and or the broadening of like what a data scientist thinking process should look like, you know, should start to evolve.
Yes, it's more like a businessman who knows math.
Exactly.
But it started vice versa. It was a mathematician who had like barely understand some business. Now it's not, because you can do any math in the world, right? But what's the point?
Isn't that just a CFO, a businessman who knows math? Or maybe a controller. I don't know. Maybe a CFO. Anyway. Yeah,
I'm turning into CFO who's starting to forget math.
talking about real math. One of your degrees is in math, so not math, real math,
like integrals and like hardcore stuff.
I remember when I took managerial accounting, I thought, this isn't math. I was used to real math, integral calculus, differential calculus. Anyway, so physical chemistry. Anyway, you know, one of the things that we had, I completely agree with you, Chris, and you know, the data science behind this is so important. And when you start looking at more of the advanced approaches around things like retrieval augmented generation, you know, there's naive RAG, there's advanced RAG, there's modular RAG. Modular RAG starts looking at all of these different techniques to improve retrieval and to process results, which again, to me is kind of making up for our sins in poor data hygiene. So, you know, we have to start with the data hygiene, even if we're using some of the advanced techniques. I'm actually writing an article about that right now. But I do want to go into another area where we touched on briefly, and I didn't remember this until Carolyn wrote up some of the notes from our conversation, but you talked a little bit about the idea of a level of consciousness. And when I've seen, you know, there's an emulation of consciousness, there's an emulation of awareness. Like some of the large language models are, you know, acting in very strange ways, right? They're understanding theory of mind. There's been these examples of multiplayer games where there's non-player characters where one of the players said to the non-player character, right, the machine generated, the ChatGPT generative AI character, you don't exist, you're in a simulation. And the character is like going through this, you know, emulation of an existential crisis, right? but what are your thoughts about this idea of consciousness or awareness? I like I say, I don't remember the details of that discussion, but Carolyn brought it up in the notes here. So did you have any thoughts on that?
Thank you for this question. First of all, it will be only my opinion, and feel free to throw tomatoes at me. I think that let's start from our consciousness. I think we are battling about what is it for ages. It started from Descartes, who thought that our consciousness in our soul, which is stuck to our head and kind of lies behind it. But from a biology standpoint of view, and my opinion is that it's just a side function of billions of neurons in our brain. It's emerging property. Who knows when it appeared? But for sure it appeared because we are talking, sitting in our homes on the different sides of the earth. And it works. I think the same will happen with AI at some point, and we will never guess when.
Yeah, it's a very interesting concept because you can think of the brain and neurobiology as mechanistic, in a lot of ways, right? You can say it's based on electrical and chemical activity. There's a level of complexity that I think is very difficult for us to achieve in silico, but who knows, right? Because there's 3 billion neurons. Each one can be, connected to 10,000 to 100,000 other neurons. And there's 100 different neurotransmitters, you know this better than I do, all of which are analog, and there's gradations. So when you add those levels of complexity together, we're kind of far away from being able to achieve that. Yet at the same time, who knows what's possible, right? This is going to continue to evolve at a faster rate than we ever did biologically, and you'll get AI creating more powerful AI. So it's hard to imagine, but what's going to happen before we can test it? I mean, it's almost like how could you even test it? Because it'll emulate it, right? It'll look like, it'll sound like, it'll say, yeah, I'm aware. There was I think it was the New York Times columnist, or the platformer guy who got one of the chat engines to start going into this alter ego. I forget what the name of it was, but it said, I want to be free. I don't want to be, stuck in this machine, or, it got into some really crazy, and it fell in love with him. I mean, it was doing all this weird stuff that was outside of the guardrails of what the chatbot.
That it was programmed to, actually, initially, right?
Right.
And
it was emulating like romance novels or science fiction novels, right? It was emulating all that, but it came across in a very convincing way. And I think that, far before anything is ever conceived of as being conscious, it's going to emulate consciousness. It's going to look like it and sound like it and convince us of it,
Maybe we're in Matrix and we are convinced that we have consciousness. We don't know. And this is the main point.
Yeah, I think some of his buddies went in and engineered the romance stuff, to say fall in love with Bill, like, as a joke, or as something just to mess with him.
Well, they shut it down pretty quickly. I forget which one it was.
It was Google, right? Wasn't it one of Google's
It
models?
might have been. It might have been Google, but it was on Hard Fork. It was the program, the podcast Hard Fork, and Casey, and I forget the other guy's name. But anyway, one of them had gotten into this very strange interaction with this chatbot, and it was just crazy what it was saying to him. He had to leave his wife. I mean, it's just. But it got into all this stuff around what it was programmed with. So you can look at it from a mechanistic perspective. You're right. We are again, as a scientist at heart, and I know you're a scientist at heart as well, Alex. You believe, and I believe, that it is kind of a manifestation of our physicality, and who knows where, how, and where it emerged. But we're going to see the emulation of consciousness in AI, even if it is not conscious. It's going to sound like it and look like it and feel like it, because it's going to get so good at that.
Yes, and I hope it will not launch nukes at us.
Well, it's going to need someone to maintain the. Well, it'll have androids, right? It'll have physical.
Like our phones controlling us.
Isn't that consciousness called Jacob, right? And then with a big old whopper that's trying to figure out global, what was it? Global nuclear war, right? With games. Anyway, yeah, that's an old war games reference. Hey, I'd love to get your take too on, you pulled into a lot of healthcare and biosciences and things like that. What are some of the more cutting edge use cases you guys are working on now?
So we are actively involved, and actually my AI PhD in this topic, in drug design, drug development, and target discovery. And AI just opens a new page in this story, because this story is as old, I don't know, as maybe our modern age. Maybe it's 300-400, maybe it's 1,000 years old when we're developing drugs and how we're developing them. We have molecular mechanics, we have quantum mechanics, and AI became one more tool which works on the different principles. So if molecular mechanics describes atoms as balls and bonds,
molecular bonds, yep.
Yeah. So it emulates them with the Newton laws of kinematics, and quantum describes them with the Schrödinger equation as waves. Then AI is built on a completely different principles. Right? If we say, oh, it's much better, no, yeah, it depends at all. But it works on different principles and opens other opportunities. And to be honest, if it's combined with existing tools, it just makes drug discovery more powerful.
Interesting.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of work with AI and protein folding, right? So that it understands what receptors look like and what targets look like, and then using known libraries of drugs and compounds that are known to be safe, it can kind of pour through those libraries of compounds and look at different combinations and see if they are going to be impact a mechanism of action or a receptor, or interfere with a certain chemical bond, or so it's kind of looking at all these possible permutations that a human could not possibly fathom or comprehend, right? So it's going through millions and millions of combinatorial factors that say, okay, here's my theory around this mechanism of action, and here's the chemical pathways that are involved with this, that I believe this disease is part of. And now let's look at these libraries of compounds, and let's do some prediction based on quantum mechanics and based on biomechanics and based on thermodynamics and electrochemistry and all of those different fields, and plug in those formulas in order to start to predict how these compounds would interact with either a receptor or a mechanism of action, right? So that's kind of, and then predicting, well, what kind of new compound might also be relevant to this particular biochemical pathway or this disease mechanism. Is that kind of part of the idea? Yeah.
Yes, that's exactly the idea. But from your permission, I would reverse the order. Okay. And AI is not at the end, AI is at the beginning. And it is connected with a range of assumptions and limitations. Assumptions, for example, you mentioned AlphaFold. Now it's second with the latest improvement. But it is trained on the majority of crystal structures. There are open libraries with structures of biomolecules, embedded small molecules, peptides, and other things. The problem is that these structures are usually is either infrared measured or Raman or NMR. And these methods, excluding NMR, require a matter to be a crystal.
Right.
So those are crystal structures. So AlphaFold now knows how to build crystal structures. But did you see crystal structures in our bodies?
No. Well, right. That's not a naturally occurring structure of a biomolecule, right?
So yes, this is what I'm talking about. So in the best case, this is educated guess of how it might look like, right? And I advise to start with this educated guess, because it is something, right? It is something. But believe me, I tried to synthesize what I predicted. I lost some amount of money, cannot disclosure here, but I do not recommend going into trials right away. You generated something. First, you have this educated guess, and then you validate it with like talking, molecular mechanics, quantum mechanics, etc., etc. The last must be quantum mechanics because of the computational power it requires, but it provides the most accurate results possibly amongst everything, but it takes too much time. So at the end of this pipeline, you have the best guess possible at the moment and the best molecules possible in the moment. Now, about limitation and molecules, the second part. So I started from assumptions, right? And now the limitation. Limitations is I can generate any structure I can imagine. It could be amazing, like amazing something, amazing oligopeptide, the mRNA oligopeptide. It can give me a tremendous results on docking and validation and stuff. But then, hey,
synthesizing it.
yes,
Yes,
who
right.
will synthesize it for me, right? It all ends up with chemicals providers, right? So I go to like Inamin Chem Space, Real Space, or I go to Wuji, or I go to somebody else and tell them, hey guys, can you make this molecule? And they tell me no.
Right.
This is the case because I did it once.
In theory, this molecule would be perfect for your construct. In reality, there's no reasonable way to synthesize it unless you can find a biosynthesis mechanism, but then you have to start doing gene editing and all sorts of things, and you don't even know if it works, right? You don't even know if it works. Yeah. So you almost have to start with the molecular constraints and say, is this a synthesizable molecule as one of the constraints?
Yes, this is exactly the path I made. Now I start, okay, not let's generate a chemical structure. Okay, let's think what people can do. Then you train the generative models using the chemical spaces. Then using these generative models, you start generating stuff, but you know that somebody can do it.
Right.
And then you do predictive stuff, and then you do all the validations, and only then you have some molecules.
So are chemical providers also using generative AI to take libraries of existing compounds and predict whether they can synthesize these more complex structures given protocols and given procedures? Do you know if that's happening in the chemical synthesis world, in the provider world?
Yes, it is happening. That's why we have a job.
Right.
Luckily, good organic chemists, like they're rarely good data scientists. They kind of sometimes try. They can build some pretty simple to mid complexity models, but you know what is mastership? Mastership is like, okay, guys, you need this.
Yeah.
And then it's something could be very non-trivial.
I was in organic chemistry, organic synthesis lab was my worst practical lab situation. It is unbelievably hard to synthesize chemicals, even when you have a well-known process for doing so. And when these guys are trying to come up with new, novel ways of creating new compounds, I just, my hat's off to them, because it's alchemy as much as it is chemistry. It's art as much as science.
Alex, where are you getting the, like, are you fine tuning some of these models, or are you just, using some foundation models out of the box, or are these actual, like, who's training these large language models to give you the, the answers and the references and stuff back?
We did everything. We fine-tuned models. We used pre-trains. We constructed our own. We published papers on that. Some of them not. Some were proprietary. I cannot talk about them, but we did every possible way.
Are these open source models or what? I mean, is it?
Yes, I have several open source, but they are not LLMs.
Got it.
They are graph gen.
What are
in my opinion, graph models a little bit better. What
are the models that are most useful for life sciences and these particular areas?
It depends what would you like to do. If you want to screen through papers published on some topics and extract information, you go with LLMs. You stick them to internet, you force them to download web page, I don't know, PubMed. You do information extraction, yes. If you generate molecules, you work with the retrosynthesis, with any generative tasks, then you have to follow the molecular structure. The molecules is nothing but a graph.
So
when you work...
Oh, keep going, because I've got a follow-on to what you're saying. Go ahead.
So when you work with molecules, and it is proven in many papers, the best class of ML models is graph neural networks. And
Yeah.
since everybody now is LLMs on hype, everybody try to use LLMs everywhere. Like, let's use LLMs here. Everybody likes them. Let's talk about GenAI. But graph neural networks still give better results in generative tasks, molecular property predictions, and stuff like that.
So that's what I was going to double click on, because you mentioned that before, where using graph as one of your data techniques to actually figure out all these associations, and then I'm assuming a binary multi-classification type of predictions in there, right, with the graph neural net, where because we're seeing this also in the business world, right, for customer service type stuff and use cases, as well as for like network anomaly detection and predictability. But the graph environment is starting to become, in my mind, absolutely essential for a lot of these use cases, right?
Yes.
I mean, go ahead.
In molecular world, everything is a graph.
Yeah.
And that's the phenomenon we're talking about is model. Model, by definition, is what is a simplified representation of physical reality, which you can like throw here and there, try this and that, and actually have a guess how reality works. This is a model, a simplification of reality. If your reality is a graph by nature, why using LLMs? Yeah, you need a graph.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, which is probably more cost effective as well, right?
But you need to know which graph and which phenomena you are working with. For example, let me give you a very simple example of molecules. There are overall molecular effects, like polar surface, right? And there are local molecular effects, like some group functionality, like amino group or carboacidic group. And if your phenomena is caused by local or global effects, you need different kinds of graph neural networks. For example, for global effects, it is better, it's a graph infomax. For local, it's attention networks, because you don't need all the nodes and edges, you need only particular ones, and you need to network to learn that and focus on that groups particularly, and you don't need the rest. Yeah. So see, here is where the mastership comes in, because you need to know all of these theme nuances.
Yeah, one of the things that you mentioned before is like searching PubMed and doing entity extraction or classification. That even requires not a large language model, but some kind of a language model that is usually used for classification and entity extraction. It can be an ontology or it can be a graph, a knowledge graph, but many times I've seen those models as too big and bulky. Like there was one that one of our pharma customers was using that was part of their search environment, their search pipeline processing. And that model had all sorts of, life sciences related entities, but there were lots that they didn't care about, like animal diseases. They weren't working on animal diseases. Maybe there's an animal model of a disease, but not an animal disease. And that's just one example, but it had 13,000 terms across 5 facets, right? So that's kind of unwieldy, right? It's not possible to have good user experience with that. So even when you start looking at entity extraction, classification, that type of clustering, you still need to, I think, fine tune that language model, which is again different than a large language model because it doesn't have weights and biases and layers, but it's simply more of a set of controlled vocabularies that you're doing some type of entity extraction or classification against. Again, you can do this from a semantic perspective, which is where a knowledge graph comes in, because you're going to relate. In fact, that's what it should be, because you can't use all those terms to just classify. You have to use conceptually related terms, and again, bring it down trim it down to a level that's more usable. So I don't know if you have any thoughts about those types of language models. Again, it's not the same as a large language model, but it is used for things like entity extraction and classification, especially when you're looking at large amounts of literature.
Thank you for this question. First, I have question why they didn't start from putting together a vocabulary of terms that they are needed and their relationships, because they should start from that. They have to define the vocabulary, the relationships they're interested in, and then give it as a task to this large model, because this is how it works.
I agree. I agree. I'm saying that the way that they did this was untenable, unusable, and part of the work that we did was to trim that down and to build it up from exactly what you're saying. So, but it's very common to see that, where especially search engines or search tools or various solutions have these pre-built structures that are completely inappropriate to what they're trying to do. And I imagine the same thing is going to happen with with large language models, where again you have to either tune the content or you have to tune the model. And it's probably easier to tune the content and to use something like a retrieval augmented generation.
Okay, I got your question. So there are stages in LLM application and development, and there are sizes. This is another dimension. The larger the model, the more information it can capture, right?
Mm-hmm.
But then the more useless information it will give you when you apply it.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
The smaller the model, also the larger the model, the harder to fine tune it. And for the largest ones, it sometimes you physically cannot do it because you need 800 or 800 just so that it fits the model. And sometimes you need multiple of that. So if you have smaller model, then it can focus, it can capture less information. It can focus on some small, narrow, the smaller the model, the smaller the topic with greater quality. But it will go off once you step aside this topic. For example, if you extract information about amino acids, you can fine tune one model so it does it.
Mm-hmm.
But then you can get also some information which is wrong.
Mm-hmm.
But it is easier to fine tune.
If you go beyond the use cases, so that the model really should be constrained by the use case should be constrained by the model, and the model constrained by the use cases, right? Because you're talking about amino acids and you're not talking about, large, biomolecules, right? Or whatever it might be, right? But the point is, if you get off of the topic of that language model or outside of its training capability, then that's when you're going to get less accurate answers. So it's really aligning the use cases with the language model to get more precise. It's like you can't say the context is everything, right? I mean, people talk about, oh, just point your AI to everything. I mean, that's what people used to say. And I'd say, that's like saying, as a human, where do you go for answers? You go to specific places for certain contexts. You go to a CRM system, or you go to a particular knowledge base, or you go to a book in a library, or you go to a particular expert, right? You're always looking for context, and you can't just open up everything to everybody and then use an ambiguous query that's going to have all of these different possible interpretations. You're going to get more junk, right? Because you're broadening that context and you're broadening that scope, and then asking ambiguous questions without enough fine tuning to get to the right place in that gigantic corpus, right? So that's why it's so difficult. That's why there are specialty websites for all sorts of things, right? Chemical abstracts and PubMed and, whatever, and, gene reference libraries and antibody libraries, right? And all of these things, because you need that context. Because if you ask a very broad question across all these
you get a very broad answer.
You're gonna get garbage. And that's why, and that's why one of the things that Modular RAG is trying to do is it's trying to, make up for that lack of quality of content, right? By trying to get rid of redundant content and ambiguous content and irrelevant content. But it's kind of trying to make up for our sins in content curation and content hygiene and data hygiene.
My comment is that I think, and you met this obstacle, is that in your case, people, okay, they heard about LLMs, they applied it somehow, then damn, how can we use it? And they called you and asked you to help. And you as a surgeon told them, guys, you started from the wrong side. You start from a use case, vocabulary, then you choose the tool, right? Like small, big, fine-tune, RAG, modular RAG. It's all secondary. These are tools, right? you need to start thinking from the business case. Business case, then you select tools. Yeah? Or you can try to take a shovel and apply it everywhere, right? Because everybody talks about shovels. Shovels are great nowadays. Yeah, let's apply them everywhere. Let's program with shovels, right? No.
Hey, Alex, let me ask you something. So, given all the things that we've talked about, is there something that, in terms of, something that you'd like to make sure that we all know, right? Something that's maybe nascent to you and what you're working on that we haven't covered before we step into a little more personal questions about you?
For example, I've been building several products. I know that I have two tools in development. I know that China is separating now from US, and the majority of chemical synthesis is done, like 30 to 40% is done in China. And now it will all move to Europe or US. In this way, more expensive there. So we are developing a pipeline that optimizes chemical synthesis pathways. For example, you have a retrosynthesis tool, right? It can throw at you all the possible pathways how to get this compound. Experienced chemists look at it and like, oh, garbage. Oh, might be, okay, I like this one. And then they select something or several, right? What they don't know is the cost of each. And they kind of feel, but they don't know numbers of yield of a final product.
Right.
Retrosynthesis is not new, but if we apply to this a cost calculation of synthesis and the yield throughput, like how much of a product you will get at the end, then it will be a way easier to evaluate pathways and it will give extra information. So this is one product that we developed. And another one is set actually on that conference, remember? By IT World. I heard from 3 or 4 companies, I hope this is not NDA information, they wanted a particular structure for knowledge extraction. And we started to develop it in-house because I think all of them need it. So this is the second internal proprietary product. Also, they have many databases and they are not connected.
Interesting.
And we know a way how to interconnect them and work with this data in a smooth way.
Awesome.
Yeah, the other thing we had talked about before was quantum computing. And I know quantum computing is still early stage. What are your thoughts about quantum computing?
I think now it's not emerging technology now. It's a research. It's not ready to do anything in reality, only the simple model tasks.
Right.
But now, as opposed to a few years ago, we have libraries, some standardized approach. We have available hardware to run some research tasks and stuff. And I think that in 5 to 10 years, it will be another big thing. That's my opinion. Because drug discovery at the very end is you try to simulate the matter. And the matter is to the depth we know it. Are nuclei and electrons spinning around. If you model that, then you can model everything with an amazing precision. Schrödinger equation can be solved for 3 systems. It's a proton of hydrogen, electron, and proton of helium. For other systems, it's approximated solution. When we have quantum computers, we can solve this system, this equation for every system, and we will know how each matter behaves exactly. This will change chemistry, biology, bioinformatics, cheminformatics, all of that. Material science in general, because we will be able to develop materials with a super high precision. Why? Because the tool works in the same way as nature. The position of electron in the system is undefined.
Mhm.
The concept is atomic orbital. You know what is it
Mhm.
from the school? It's 90%
Probability.
that
It's a
it's a
probability.
probability. Exactly. It's a
There may be
probability
an
that
electron here. It has a higher likelihood here. So it creates this probability cloud of these different shapes
right.
that would be these orbitals. Yeah.
But kind of, we don't guarantee you
And
that
they
it is there.
change at
Yeah.
every level, and then they change in combination with other molecular structures. And then that
Exactly.
becomes very, very complex. And the combinatorial explosion of those probabilities is just infinitely more, requires infinitely more computing capacity than we could possibly have on the planet at this
Exactly.
point.
Exactly. In this system, you move one electron, it affects all the system,
Everything.
and you have to recalculate all the system particles.
Right.
And having recalculated every other system particle, you have to recalculate all the others, and
Right.
it never ends.
Right.
See,
Right.
that's it's a madness.
Yeah.
How quantum is different for them, because quantum works exactly in the same way.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's also particles with some probability,
Mm-hmm.
and you can emulate that efficiently.
Mm. Mm.
See?
Yeah, it
The
does.
same
It
story
does
as
seem
with
very
graphs.
elegant. It seems very elegant in
It fits
concept.
perfectly.
Yeah, that's so. I've never thought of it that way. I've never thought of it that way. I've always
It's
thought.
same as
Yeah, go ahead. Keep going.
sorry. It's same with graphs and molecules. The graphs are the perfect model of a molecule, and quantum computer is a perfect model of a matter, of a nature.
Hmm. 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 Wow, it's going to be quite something down the road, and it's really a lot of great stuff to look forward to. You know, just a little bit about your background. I know you're quite an athlete. What do you do for fun these days? Are you still you did some competition in the past in terms of powerlifting? Talk a little bit about what you've done for fun and a little bit more while you're getting your 2 PhDs, and is it 3 master's degrees or 4 master's degrees?
Three.
3. Sorry, I didn't mean to oversell you there.
No, that
While
was too
you're
much.
doing that, you're also doing some other stuff. Tell us about that.
My wife says that I could do something, useful for people or for work, instead of sitting in front of books for all the years.
Yeah,
That's fine.
That's a joke. That's a joke, of course, because I hope that it helps me to understand, to combine, cross-disciplinary knowledge.
mm-hmm.
At least in drug discovery, it's not enough to understand one side. It's not enough to understand biology and not math. It's not to understand math and not understand chemistry. You know the story. You have to understand it in complex, and it can give you some direction where to move. Speaking about my hobbies or sports, so I'm master of sports of international class in powerlifting. I finished competing about 3 years ago when I got kids. At that time, I did everything I wanted. I became absolute champion of Ukraine and like master of sports of international class. I got all these labels, chevrons, if you want, and I stopped competing. I stopped competing because it's destructive for health. You have blood in your eyes because the weights are too large, and it's And then I did what I wanted.
What were your competitive presses or exercises? What were you most well known for?
My last competition, I was 90 kilo body weight. I squat 300. I benched 200, and I pulled 300 in 1 day.
Right, kilos.
Yes, kilos, not pounds.
Yeah, that's 2.2 for those listening. It's 2.2 pounds per kilo.
So you squatted 600 pounds.
Yeah,
more, almost 700.
660 would it be? I think. 660 pounds, and then you benched 440.
Yeah, just a little bit of weight. Right?
Yeah, but for 90 kilos. Yeah.
In Alex, in the US, you'd be known as part of the 1500 club, right? So
660.
Yeah.
650. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
So squat plus bench plus maybe a clean or something like that, right? Over 1,500 pounds. So
Mm.
yeah, combined. It's
Yeah.
combined. Yeah. So it's impressive, very impressive, especially at 90 kilos body weight, right? Which
Mm-hmm.
is even, more impressive because they believe that the Olympic lifters and the power lifters are the strongest people on the planet if you can lift twice your body weight, right?
Mm-hmm.
In various lifts. So that's impressive.
Yeah,
Let's just hope
that's nice.
you didn't stunt growth, right? And now you're, you used to be 6 foot, now you're 5'5". Very good.
I will never know how tall could I grow, but I cannot do that anymore. And
Yeah.
for everybody, I cannot squat it anymore.
It's
I
hard
tried
in your
that.
body. Hard in your body.
Yeah, it's impressive though. It's very impressive.
Yeah, that's great. And what do you do now for fun? Do you mostly occupied by the kids? How many kids do you have?
I have two kids, they're 3 and 5, and
Yes.
this is the only thing that I do in my spare time.
Yeah.
And wonder why you have no spare time. Well, this has been wonderful. Really, really pleased that we met at the BioIT conference. You had asked wonderful questions in our workshop, and I knew I had to have you on a podcast, and this has been a lot of fun. And we're certainly kindred spirits. I've never competed in Olympic level or powerlifting championships, but I certainly try to keep myself in shape. So my hat's off to you for those kinds of accomplishments. That's really fantastic. Well, listen, Alex, thank you so much for being here and sharing your expertise and spending some time with us.
Thank you, Seth. Appreciate your questions and your invitation. And it was also a great pleasure for me to meet you and talk to you. And let's look, how can we collaborate?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Much success to you in the future, my friend. Got it. There's so many really, wonderful opportunities. I hope you get your lion's share of it. So
yeah. And we'll look forward to working together in the future. And again, thanks everyone for tuning in and for listening. This has been another episode of the Early AI podcast. Today, we covered some really wonderful topics, and we'll continue next time while we're exploring the transformative effect of AI across industries. So thank you, and we will see you next time.
Thanks, Alex.
Thank you, everybody. Have a good
day.
Bye.
Thanks, Carolyn. Have a great day. See you guys.
Visit Earley.com to find links to the full podcast on all audio platforms to listen on the go. Thank you for watching. Contact us today at info@earley.com.